So I'm trying to remember a time in my life that I felt more secure as a fan of Nintendo. In this video, we're going to be talking about how amazing it is to be a fan of Nintendo today. Now, if you recall, roughly a month or so ago, I released a video talking about how shockingly difficult it can be to be a Nintendo fan, just because of the perception of Nintendo, how Nintendo has treated us, and just in general, all the difficulties that surround being a fan of the Big N. But at the same time, and I always knew I was going to have this follow-up at some point, it's also shockingly awesome to be a Nintendo fan today in 2018. You see, most of this is because of the Nintendo Switch and the Switch's general reception among gamers and the whole of the media. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go too far to find retractors. In fact, I've saw several retractors just this month, usually smaller YouTubers and some people on Reddit and in some forums, talking about how much the Nintendo Switch sucks and how Nintendo Labo sucks and blah, 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 blah. But on the whole, it's actually a great time to be a Nintendo fan because Nintendo is being more accepted, both in the gaming universe and culturally at the same time. Now, Nintendo has been widely accepted in the past. The Wii era, as an example. Nintendo Wii and DS were arguably the most popular dual systems releasing around the same time and lasting for around the same time in the history of gaming, and they were hugely popular and culturally were, widely accepted. But gamers would still kind of look down on you if Wii or DS were your primary gaming platforms because it couldn't play your Call of Duties at a higher resolution and a higher frame rate and all this stuff. And it's not just Call of Duty minigames. The Wii and DS did not get a lot of third-party games in terms of the multi-platform games. It had some third-party games. It got Maddens, but it was arcade versions of Madden. It didn't feel like it was getting the quality of games that other platforms were getting when it came to the multi-platform games. And the same is true of the DS, and it was kind of true of the 3DS as well, and obviously of the Wii U. And you could argue it's even somewhat true of Switch. The difference is that Switch is being allowed to exist in its own space. And to this day, I've always argued that the Super Nintendo is my favorite era of gaming because the Super Nintendo and even the Sega Genesis at the time got all the third-party platform games, got all their exclusive games, and it was just a great time to be a gamer. There wasn't really a dispute over content between platforms like there is today. As Nintendo fans, we're still just hoping that we get full third-party AAA support day and date. We really are just hoping that we get that, whereas we didn't have to hope on the Super Nintendo. Sega Genesis fans didn't have to hope on the Sega Genesis. And certainly we didn't have to hope on the Nintendo Entertainment System as well. And even the N64, that was kind of where things started to drop off a little bit for Nintendo in their third-party support, but it still was a lot better than it is today. So I'm not saying that this is the greatest era of Nintendo ever. Again, NES, SNES, and Game Boy era, those three systems and three generations are kind of where it was kind of the heyday to be a Nintendo fan. It was cool to be a Nintendo fan. Gamers primarily played Nintendo platforms. Even the Sega Genesis was being called a Nintendo. When the PlayStation 1 released, at the time, it was still being called a Nintendo by the general populace. Because culturally and gaming-wise, Nintendo was viewed as the king of the mountain. And now, we fast forward to 2018, and, I'm trying to make this argument that it's never been a better time to be a Nintendo gamer because outside of the fact that obviously Nintendo dominated in the 80s and early 90s, reality is that it's easy to dominate when there's not a lot of stiff competition. Obviously, Sega Genesis came along eventually, and then we had the PlayStation brand come along as well. But reality is that until really the PlayStation brand and the PlayStation 2 became this big, massive ordeal, Nintendo just didn't have a lot of serious competition for the mind share of the cultural relevancy and gamers. So ever since there's been legit competition for Nintendo, I'd argue that Switch is really the best era that we've had so far, less than a year into its generation. And the reason I argue that is because gamers seem to get it. I don't know why, but PC Master Race, PlayStation 4 owners, Xbox gamers, as much as they might lobby criticism at Nintendo fans for various things, a lot of them seem to understand the appeal of Switch. Now, they're still going to talk about how PlayStation 4, especially at the extreme end, that PlayStation 4, Xbox One, PC are all better systems. But they also understand that Switch is providing something that their systems aren't, and that's the ability to play these games on the go. When you have a PC person willing to play Doom at 30 FPS, occasionally less than sub HD on the Switch, just because they want to take it on the go, that's shocking. Coming from a PC gamer that is used to having things at 120 FPS and 1080p or 4K or 1440p. It's really shocking to hear their love of a platform like Switch, and that's just getting into the how gamers have accepted the Switch into the video game culture, because the gaming culture kind of rejected Wii U. It kind of rejected Wii even in a sense, and arguably rejected GameCube. And yeah, the N64 was important for its generation, but was playing second and third fiddle really. But Switch isn't really playing second fiddle to anyone. It's not the king of the mountain. PlayStation 4 is at the top. 3DS is at the top. Those are the top platforms out there in terms of numbers, in terms of game units, in terms of sales. But Switch isn't battling on the same battleground that these platforms were battling on in the past. Switch has found its own market share, a market share that crosses over with PlayStation 4, crosses over with Xbox One, crosses over with PC, and even crosses over with the 3DS, but doesn't really replace those platforms either. Now, I've talked about in the past how Switch should replace 3DS, but it hasn't yet. 3DS sold 750,000 units in December of 2017. If Switch fully replaced 3DS, then why the heck is 3DS having its best sales month since 2014 in 2017? Reality is that 3DS is still a hot ticket item. It still has a vast library of games, and honestly, it's the perfect platform for a budget-oriented gamer, because the games, brand new wise, are $40. There are many of the best games on the platform for only $20. Third parties are discounting their games on it all the time. When holidays roll around, you could buy like a 2DS, a new Nintendo 2DS even probably next holiday, and get like 6 games packaged with it for $200. Like, that's a really good budget-oriented deal. So 3DS has kind of found its niche today in today's market for a budget-oriented gamer, especially when it comes to parents looking at products for children. But Switch is kind of its own thing. The appeal of Switch is kind of, threefold. Obviously, there's the portability and the ability to play it on your TV. The whole premise of Switch is just brilliant, and I'm not going to go too far into why Switch is successful, but that's just part of the appeal. The other part of the appeal is playing AAA quality games on the go. Now, we don't have full AAA third-party support, and I'm kind of hoping that happens. But the games we have gotten, whether they're old ports or newer games or games from Nintendo or even the indie scene, have been awesome. Now, the indie scene's another one as well. A lot of people like having indie games to play on the go, and, well, that was mostly the Vita that kind of served that audience. 3DS had some, but Vita was kind of the go-to, and Vita flopped, and Nintendo Switch has easily replaced the Vita when it comes to the indie scene. So it's kind of a nice culmination of events. On top of the fact that gamers are viewing Switch as being a cool device, accepting it for what it is, not viewing it as necessarily direct competition, but even as a complementary system in some cases, then you have people out there culturally that are starting to view Switch as this quintessential thing in the marketplace. And Nintendo Labo, believe it or not, actually helps further that premise by showing parents that, hey, here's this cool do-it-yourself creation kit that you can do with your kids, making cardboard art projects. And it's a really interesting thing where that helps Nintendo become accepted culturally. And if you don't believe that Nintendo Labo is a popular concept, all you have to do is glance at the unveiling trailer, which I believe is over 6 million or 7 million views at this point, over 300,000 likes with only 25 to 30,000 dislikes, and most of those dislikes coming from people who the product's not even intended for. It's just a very interesting proposition where Nintendo has found a way to make gamers extremely accepting of Switch as a platform, while at the same time making the general, consumer out there see value in a product like Switch at a time when, they're still selling SNES classics and NES classics and 3DSs, and the PlayStation 4 is still selling really, really well. The Xbox One X just had a really nice debut for the holiday season. The PC gaming has slowed down a little bit just because of crypto mining has made the GPU prices go insane. My GTX 1070 has gone from a value of $400 when I bought it to over $1,000 some days. That's just nuts to me that that's even a thing. I have the MSI Gamer X edition. It's crazy the pricing of GPUs right now, but it's still interesting to me to think about what it's like to be a Nintendo gamer today. I'm used to walking around and getting hate, as I talked about a month ago, and how hard it can be to be a Nintendo fan. Right now, in today's gaming climate, I feel like it's almost easier to be a Nintendo fan if you are someone who bought a Switch. And it's just being accepted across the board. There are going to be critics. There's always going to be critics of the Switch. Oh, it only runs games at sub HD at times. It only hits 30 FPS. It's only this. It's only that. The hardware is weak. I don't get it. Blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. That exists for every platform. There's people that don't get the Xbox One X. There's people who don't get the PlayStation 4. This is always going to be a thing. But slowly that's becoming the minority voices out there. It's quickly become apparent at the beginning of 2018 just how acceptable the Switch has become. I'll give you an example. So, I took my kids to the mall the other day. We went to the play place in the mall. There's this little free play area for kids that you go in there. And for some reason, I had my Switch with me. I think I was buying a new memory card at GameStop, and I was seeing if I could possibly trade in my old memory cards, but I wasn't sure, so I just brought my whole Switch with because one of my memory cards was inside my Switch. And they ended up not taking the trade-in for the memory cards, which is fine. It wasn't a big deal. I only even got it at GameStop because I had a gift card. But we went to the play area with my son, my two sons. I didn't have my daughter with me that day. So it was my 4-year-old son, my 2-year-old son, and they were playing, right? I took out my Switch, just started playing some games. I think I was playing NBA Playgrounds, and then I eventually played a little bit of Breath of the Wild before switching over to Odyssey, and I think eventually Snipper Clips of all things. Haven't played that in forever. And as I was doing that, and I was watching my kids, I made sure, it's kind of like I had one eye on the screen, one eye on my kids, and I sat closer to the entrance because my 2-year-old, he likes to run all over the mall. If you take your eye off him for a second, he will bolt out and start running all over the mall. He just loves running in the mall. But anyways, so as I was doing that, there were people that started coming up to me like, hey, is that a Nintendo Switch? I'm like, yeah, it's really cool that you're a parent with a Switch. I'm like, yeah, and then my son would walk up like, yeah, he's playing Switch. We sometimes play it at home, and they're like, man, that's awesome that you're bringing your kids up into gaming the right way, but they're not, coming over here and staring at you play. They're still playing with other kids. It's kind of amazing, and the Switch is cool, and they're just blown away by some of the games. And ended up showing off the Switch to people that had heard about it and seen commercials, but hadn't really seen it in person being used by anyone outside of a kiosk. And they're just like, man, you're playing these games on the go? That's awesome. And I actually believe one of the people who saw me playing it went that day to GameStop in the mall and ended up buying a Switch for himself. And I've never had this happen before. I played 3DS out in public. I played DS out in public, and for the most part, you were kind of looked down upon. It was weird because a lot of people culturally view those as kids' products, but that doesn't seem to be what's happening with Switch. I can't quite explain what it is about Switch that makes it so culturally acceptable, that makes gamers so acceptable of it, because I just know why I love the system. And I've been a Nintendo fan for years. But I'm 31 years old, going to be 32, and it feels like I've just been playing Nintendo systems for 30-plus years of my life. This is where I actually want to drive the conversation home to you guys. I want to know why you think Switch has become this thing where gamers and even, just culturally, beyond gaming, it's become acceptable to play a Switch in public. It's become acceptable to have a Switch. It's become acceptable to be a Nintendo gamer. You guys let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. I am Nathaniel Rufflegents from Nintendo Prime, and if you like this video, you know what to do, and if you dislike the video, hit that dislike button. Subscribe for more content. And as always, folks, I will catch you in the next one.